What's up YouTube, how's it going? It is your boy Br8kz here, and I am starting a new series called Break with Br8kz. This is a series where I give you tips and tricks to get better at MK. So let's take a break as we break down some MK with me, Br8kz. First things first on the agenda, frame data. Frame data lets you know what kind of advantages you have and if you're at a disadvantage or neither. So to look at frame data, you'd open up your move list, and on the right hand side here you'd see frame data. We have startup, active, recovery, block advantage, hit advantage, and cancel. Startup is the amount of frames it takes for a move to start up, obviously. Active is the amount of frames that move is active for after you had started it up. Recovery is the amount of frames it takes for your character to return to neutral. Block advantage is the amount of frames you have after blocking an opponent. You either have an advantage or a disadvantage. With this move, with square, with 1, we have an advantage because there's no minus in front of the 2. So if we were to just press 1, we gain a 2 frame advantage. Hit advantage, that's the advantage you have if you were to hit your opponent with that move. Cancel, those are the amount of frames you have available to cancel your move into a special move. Let's go ahead and look at the hit advantage. Hit advantage is 10 frames. So if I were to press square and I were to hit my opponent, I now have a 10 frame advantage in which I can do something before he can. Next, let's look at block advantage. Block advantage is just 2 when it comes to square. So if he were to block my square, my 1, if he were to block that, I have 2 frame advantage. Although 2 frames doesn't seem like a lot, what 2 frames allows you to do is basically down poke before he can do anything, or grab before he can do anything. Those are your 2 fastest moves when you have a small advantage like that. 2 frames basically gives you 2 frames in which you can do anything you want before your opponent can do something. However, if you do a move that takes a lot of frames to start up, your opponent can do a quicker move to punish it. So if I were to try to do a move that's like a full combo like this that says 22 frames to start up, and he were to do something very simple like a down poke, he would poke me out before I were to be able to get my full combo out, because the advantage I have is only 2 frames, not 22 frames. However, even though this is a long string, when looking at the frames for startup, you want to look at what the very first frame is. See how the very first frame in this startup string is triangle? If we were to go here and look at what triangle is alone, the triangle is a 9 frame startup. So that means although this string is a 22 frame startup, just for the triangle to come out, it's going to come out at 9 frames. So after the 9 frames, after we press triangle, the rest will be 22 frames. That's just a little trick to know so that way you guys can know what to punish. So although this combo string here, triangle, square, square, says 20 frames, which is pretty long, just the triangle alone is 9 frames. So I know that if my opponent does a move that's negative of 10 frames or more, I can punish it with this 9 frame move. Now let's look at what negatives are. Negative, if you notice in the block advantage, see how this triangle says minus 14? That means if I were to press triangle and my opponent were to block it, he has 14 frames in which he can do something before I can do anything. 14 frames is quite a lot of frames. Most people can get a full combo punish off of something like 12 frames or 10 frames. In order to get a punish on a minus frame move, you need to do a move that's 1 frame faster than what the minus says. So although this says minus 14, he actually doesn't have 14 frames to punish me before I could block. What he really has is 13 frames to punish me before I could block. So if you're looking for a move that is trying to punish a negative move, make sure you pick a move that starts up 1 frame faster than what their negative is. Next, let's look at hit advantage. Hit advantage is the advantage you get from attacking opponent and the attack completing. So although these combos take a lot to start up, their hit advantage is very small, only at 3. Let's look at one of my favorite forms of hit advantage, and that's a down poke. Right here you see down X, which is 3, a low attack that starts up at 11 frames, which is fairly fast and has a 14 advantage on hit. So if I were to connect this hit right here, this down 3, I have 14 frames in which I can do something before he can do something. So what I want to do with a 14 frame advantage is I tend to hit and then grab. Although it doesn't seem like a super combo or anything like that, it's not a combo. It's just a small amount of damage that you can get out that's almost guaranteed. It's a guaranteed amount of damage. After this connects, your opponent then immediately needs to tech your grab if they predict you're going to grab. Otherwise, they're going to lose 12% of their health. At 14 frames, you don't have too much to do before they can block. So if you were to do this and then try to do something like that, which is square, 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 which starts up at 9 frames, your opponent can just block and stop what you're trying to do. So one of my favorite things, and you'll watch a lot of players, even the professionals, when they connect a down poke and they have that 14 frame advantage or whatever their frame advantage is from a down poke, if you notice this down one is 16 frames, which is even larger advantage, you can immediately grab after that and guarantee yourself 12% damage and space control. Space control will work over in another video. One of my favorite moves with Kenshi is back X triangle. However, it takes 18 frames to start up and it's -4. If I were to do this, although -4 is not a lot, any amount of frames that's generally higher than 2 can be grabbed out. So -4, if he were to block it and stay close enough, he can grab before I can press anything else. Another thing that you need to take into account, however, when blocking moves is distance from one another. Okay, we set him to grab on response. Let's see if he can grab to punish our -4 frame move. And he did grab. Let's see if maybe we can do something to get out of that grab. Okay, we backdash. Now, frame data doesn't tell you everything, because there are some things that frame data won't let you know, like, as we saw earlier, the backdash lets me get out of that grab. Oh, I messed up my timing there. But backdash lets me get out. Grab can punish almost any negative move, so grab is very effective. However, if there's a distance between us, I can backdash, which gives me invulnerable frames. In case you guys don't know, backdashing at the very beginning of a backdash gives you startup invulnerable frames. Next, let's learn startup. At 13 frames, it's a fairly decent startup. However, it's not the fastest, especially when you're close to your opponent. This back one starts up at 13 frames, which is good, but not great. When you're really close to people, they generally like to down poke. And as we've seen, down pokes are the fastest form of pokes. So if I were to try this move, he can down poke before I can get this move out, if I were too close. Next, let's look at active frames. For active frames, I went to Scorpion for this because he's known for having very long active frames. Two of his most famous active frames are his Flame Aurora and his Jumping Kick, both of which are very famous for having long active frames. So his Jumping Kick, his Jumping X, is active for 13 frames. That means for those 13 frames, if my opponent were to try to do something and not block, he'd get hit by it. I'm sure there are plenty of times you were playing online where Scorpion jumped in from about where I am right here and still hit you with his Jumping X. Because the Jumping X has a very long amount of active frames. So if I were to jump and you notice how long Scorpion kept his leg out for, if he were to try to jump into that, he would get hit by it. Or if he were to try to move forward, he would get hit by it. Next, let's look at another one of Scorpion's moves. 29 active frames on Flame Aurora. Flame Aurora is probably one of the most famous moves for catching people off guard because it's active for such a long amount of time. While 29 frames doesn't seem like a lot, it's a very long time. In order to display how long it's active for, I'm going to make Sub-Zero jump towards me, and we're going to activate it before he even begins to jump towards us. Oh. As you can see there, he jumped well after I had already began to activate my Flame Aurora. However, Flame Aurora has such a long amount of time in which it's active that he immediately got hit as he got close. That's what active frames are. Next, we're going to look at neutral moves. What neutral means is that after doing the move, you don't have an advantage and you don't have a disadvantage. If you notice here, on hit, it says 0. So if I were to do this move and my opponent were to get hit by it, it would have no advantage and no disadvantage. You would just be both at 0 frames. If you were to throw and then meter burn it, you don't have an advantage and they don't have a disadvantage. If you notice here, it says 0. He would be able to block any move I tried to do after it. If you notice, I set him to block to show you what a neutral move can do. Neutral moves means that you don't have an advantage or disadvantage. So anything you try to do after that, your opponent can also either block or do something before you do, or at the same time in which you do. If you notice, he blocked. Another one of Kenshi's neutral moves is his triangle triangle, which is 2-2. If you notice, on hit, it says 0 hit advantage. That means that if I were to do this move and it were to connect, then I have no advantage. We're both at the same exact playing field. However, if he were to block it, it's -10. So he can do anything that starts up at 9 frames and punish me. Right there. Which is essentially the same as a meter burn grab, but without the grab part. So in order for that to come out, I actually need to connect the hit. This puts us both at neutral. So I have no advantage and no disadvantage from doing this. All this does is mix it up so I can do other things if I choose. It switches the side, and it allows me to do whatever I want. There are other characters that have neutral frame moves. I don't know if every single character has neutral frame moves, but in order to find out, just look at your character's frame data, and if it has 0 either in the hit advantage or block advantage, that means that it is neutral. So that's it for frame data. I hope you guys all enjoyed and learned everything that you needed to know about frame data, so that way you can get in there, learn how to apply pressure the right way to give yourself always an advantage and never a disadvantage. And at least when you're at a disadvantage, you'll know, so that way you can block or do moves accordingly. Be sure to subscribe for some more MKX content, as there are definitely more MKX videos on the way. If you're not already subscribed, if you enjoyed the video and there's something else you'd like to know about frame data, leave a comment in the comment section. I'll be sure to get back to you.